If you ask me, then one of the most important metrics of the code is maintainability. In this video, we will talk how we can improve maintainability by using consistent styling and formatting and tools that help us do so. But first, let's grab some. When writing JavaScript or TypeScript applications, there are two tools that can help you with the code maintainability. It's Linter, that takes care for code styling. The most commonly used one is ESlint, and the code formatter that takes care of formatting the visual appearance of the code. And de facto standard there is Prettier. And I believe if you start a new project, those are the first two tools you need to configure alongside with TypeScript. But TypeScript is a separate topic. But those two tools are essential to configure. So how do they improve code maintainability? We're different people, so we write code in a different style. Tools like Linters, they at least ensure that we have as much consistency as we can get. We ensure that we follow the same common good practices and do not leave unpleasant stuff, like, for example, leaving console log when you have been debugging things. My personal first experience with ESlint was not so great because, to my taste, it feels like it's a little bit hard to configure because there are so many different configuration settings you need to use, and then there are so many different packages you potentially want to use with different kind of sets of rules. So the very first thing you want to do is to find a very solid basis for your own ESlint configuration. So here's the repository called Awesome ESlint that contains different presets from different big companies. Several years ago, Airbnb preset was the most popular one, especially for developing JavaScript code. But these days you can also see there are good examples for React application, the one from Facebook, the one from Shopify, from Vercel, and so on and so forth. I believe using any of those presets would be better than not use anything at all. But I personally felt they are a bit too opinionated to my taste. So what I end up been using is a TypeScript ESlint as the base for my ESlint configurations. But since, as I said, I believe that configuring ESlint and Prettier should be the very first step you do in the new project, or when you decide to work on a legacy project if you can, it could be very tedious to configure that again and again and again, especially because if you want to build a consistency not only for your big side project, but also, for example, for the company you're working for. I believe the best way is to build your own package and make sure that it is super easy to use that package. So it should be quite trivial to configure ESlint for any project you're going to start working on. So here's my project. Currently this Vue Club monorepo is the only side project I currently have. So I have decided there is no reason for me to publish this package to NPM, but there is a very much similar project that I built for the company I work for that is published to our private NPM. The eslint-config project takes care of ESlint configuration. In the package.json, we can see that this package provides with everything we need to use ESlint in any other project we're going to work on. It has ESlint, ESlint-config Prettier, ESlint plugin React, Prettier, TypeScript ESlint, ESlint plugin, etc. and so on. So basically all the ESlint plugins I'm interested in using are in this package. And then, taking into account that I primarily work either with Node.js or with React, I would prefer to build this base.js file that creates this base configuration for the ESlint. This base configures it based on the TypeScript ESlint recommendations, which is set ESlint recommended, set TypeScript ESlint recommended, set plugin Prettier recommended at the end. And I also have the rule that allows only using console for warn error or info. Since usual suspect is console log that I personally use very often when I try to debug application. Then this project itself consumes this base. It has ESLinter.c file that extends from that base. And then there are two specific extensions from the base, Node and React. Node, before extending from the base, it also uses a plugin that is specific for the Node applications, which is plugin security. Also, it has environment set to Node. It has settings for import resolver to list all the extensions I care for ESlint, which is JS and TS files. It points where we should look for tsconfig JSON file, and that for the parsing we should use tsconfig JSON file. Similar situation with React. It will extend the base, but it also will use all the plugins specific for the React. It will make sure that the environment is a browser one. It will turn off the prop types for the TSX files, and basically same settings. That is, JS, JSX, TS, and TSX extensions will be checked, and where the TypeScript file is located. And then I have another package called prettier-config. Prettier-config only mentions index.json as the main file, and then index.json contains the prettier-config itself. It's based on the original default values, but then slightly tweaked to my own liking. For example, trailing comma all, about which I had a very long discussion with my colleague, who convinced me that having trailing comma all is extremely important rule that helps see differences in the code differ much better. The reason there are two packages, one for Prettier and one for ESlint, because originally I have tried to use Prettier so that eslint-config kind of configures everything. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful to make it to work. Then I have found Prettier documentation, how to build packages so that you can share the rules for the formatter. And then I set it among the dependencies. I just need to put this Prettier as the property of the package.json file of whatever package I'm going to consume Prettier for. Just specify the name of the package. Then in any other project, for example, here I'm building some API version 2 version of my API. I can just add eslint-config and prettier-config as dev dependencies. Then create this eslint-JSON file that has the property root true, telling ESlint not to look for files or rules further than this file. So it's not going to look up high in the tree hierarchy of your file organization. And then I extend, since it's API, I extend from the Node version of the eslint-config. While here on the front end, I, on the contrary, extend from React. And then essentially it's just 5 lines of code. I can ensure that I have the consistent styling and formatting in any project I'm working on. So to recount, eslint-config and prettier-config as dev dependencies, this is 2 lines. Prettier-config is the 3rd line, and then eslint-JSON is just 2 more lines. And there are 2 more things that I need to configure only once, specifically in Visual Studio Code. If I bring up the command palette and I go to user settings, we need to make sure that for JavaScript, TypeScript React, JavaScript React, TypeScript, the default formatter is ESlint extension for Visual Studio Code, because that ESlint extension will then use ESlint configuration you have specified for your project, because by default I think it uses the TypeScript configuration instead, meaning that TypeScript will configure it one way, and then when you do the linting of your application, for example, during the commit or whatever, as it often happens, you will get completely different configuration, or you will get completely different formatting, and they will be in a conflict with each other. So you want that Visual Studio Code formats respecting your ESlint config. And the last important gotcha, that specific for monorepo scenarios, which I think both true for npm monorepo or pnpm monorepo, and I guess yarn monorepo, is that we want to have .vscode folder in our project that should have a settings.json for that project, and it should have this ESlint working directories mod auto to be set for this project. Because unfortunately the default configuration for ESlint doesn't respect this root true property, and instead goes even higher in the hierarchy up until the root of the workspace. So if I remove this line, then ESlint extension for Visual Studio Code not going to respect this root true property. It's not going to stop here at this file, meaning it's not going to find this tsconfig JSON file, but instead it will be looking for tsconfig file at the very root of the monorepo. And that's why you will be getting this weird ESlint unable to resolve path to module kind of shenanigan, because it cannot find the correct tsconfig file. With ESlint working directories mod auto, it will stop at this ESlint rc root true property, knowing that it doesn't need to go any further, and it will look up the tsconfig file. Since based on the settings I have showed you, it will look for tsconfig JSON file relative to ESlint rc JSON file. So Linter will help you with code maintainability by enforcing the common good practices around writing your JavaScript or TypeScript code. For example, in this case, it complains that since it's a JS file, the function and class name, they are not described as a properties. So we don't know what kind of type they have, and it forces you to use that we're missing the prop validation, which comes from the React package for ESlint. Here's another one where we left a variable that we do not use anywhere in the code. which create unnecessary noise, and so on and so forth. There are like lots and lots of examples. And ideally, you would configure that in your CI/CD pipeline, or a lot of people like to use Git hooks. And very popular way is, of course, using the package Husky that allows you to describe different kind of scripts that should run when different Git actions happen. For example, it's very popular to run linters on Git commit hooks, meaning that when you perform a Git commit, it will also run a linter and will lint the files you have changed. So that's how the linter contributes to the code maintainability. What about formatter? Let's take a look at the commit I have made just for the sake of problem visualization. Here, what I actually changed was removing the word React, since I'm using React 18. Since starting from React 17, React uses the JSX runtime, so it's no longer important to do this import React from React as it was prior to version 17. So let's say here the actual change here is that I removed the word React. But it's very, very hard to see that, in my opinion, because all of this reformatting of the code. And then what would happen if I have one formatter and my colleague had another formatter, or I have used, I don't know, work on different computers and somehow I have configured Visual Studio Code differently on every computer. So you get the point. I hope that was interesting for you. Thank you, and see you in the next one.